Thank you. Let's come on up, guys. We want to jump right into it. Unlike the professor who was recently on the stage, Rihanna Tani, I will leave it to the experts here to speak. I have with me Paul Saba, who's Vice President and Senior Counsel, Marriott Development out of Dubai, and thank you for freeing up your time. I know he's got a team here who's got churning out 30 plus deals a year, so this is about the only free time he has in his life. And and Lada Shalnikova, and welcome
Well done.
as well. Partner on the hotels and hospitality side at Watson, Farley and Williams out of Singapore, recognized as a global elite leader, thought leader in the hospitality space in Asia Pacific, and covers over 25 jurisdictions, so we'll get a lot of insights from her. And I will gonna jump right into it. We're gonna answer a few questions and just keep it rolling. Actually, a little bit flipping it on the backside to start things off. If you're a developer, investor, new brand getting into the residential space, there are many questions they should have. You have to ask questions, and even more that you won't even think of. Let's flip this around and start at operations, as this should demonstrate the need to get things right early on, make some decisions early on, and those decisions impact the operations of the property. So Lada, can you provide insight into the post-sellout operating scenarios that you see out there?
Okay, so there are two parts to this question. First is when do we determine the post-sellout operating scenarios? And second question is what other scenarios in this particular project, in this particular jurisdiction. So let's start with when, and I'm sure Paul will confirm, the earlier the better. And in any case, before you go to market, you need to know what is your post-sellout operating structure will be, because that will be embedded in your buyer-facing documents. So that is what different operators have different names for it, but we call it a project structuring exercise, which is pretty much the fundamentals of how your project will operate post-opening. It is easy to construct, it is easy to open, and that's just the beginning of the story. The actual story begins afterwards, because we're talking about all the possible deadlocks, all the possible things that can go wrong, and we will be discussing today what can go wrong. But ultimately, the answer is, it is the very first step. And from the developer's perspective, we need to change that perspective, because a lot of developers think that branded residences is a quick sell out and off you go with move on with your life. The reality is, there is a big difference between a residential product and a branded resi product, because branded resi just begins, the story just begins when you open the door. So 15, 20, 25 years of branding, and that's in order to make sure that the brand stays, the structure has to be sustainable. In terms of what are those structures, there are two, globally, there are two structures. There are various hybrid structures as well, but mostly there are two structures. First is where the operator requires, or brand requires, the developer to stay in the middle. And in which case the developer has the relationship with owner association, whilst the brand only supervises the developer's management function. So in that case, operator or brand does not have direct contractual relationship with the unit owners and your owners association. That is the most risk-adjusted, risk-balanced position for an operator. Now, it does not mean that there is no scenario where there is direct contractual relationship between the developer, between the brand and the owner association. There are examples, but it very much depends on the jurisdiction, the project layout, the bargaining strengths of the developer. As in any other project, you can negotiate things, and sometimes you can negotiate your way into this kind of structure. But from operators' perspective, the preferred structure is risk-adjusted, where they don't have a direct contractual relationship.
Excellent. I'll throw it to Paul, because we'll dig into this jurisdiction a little bit, or some others that are maybe a little bit different, where the requirements for licensing of building managers, strata managers, property managers, so on, are required. Where Marriott as a brand may not, have the resources or the structure in place. So could you provide a couple of examples how you would handle that structure when you need that type of management structure? I know Dubai, Abu Dhabi, places like that.
Yeah, thank you. Following on from what Lada was saying, Marriott and most other operators, especially in this part of the world where associations aren't super regulated, or they can't hold a jurisdictional type of like a corporate body to be an employer to make decisions. We do rely on the developer to be the conduit between us and the homeowners. I think in Dubai specifically, because it is more regulated than other areas in the GCC, there are no associations as of 2019, and because of that, you have a building manager entity who's licensed to perform those facilities management services. We contract with the developer if it's a co-located and if it's a standalone to be the conduit between us and this building management entity. Generally, we ask our developer to establish its own FM company so that it's relatively seamless, but there is an opportunity to have a third-party FM manager in place, and we have many examples where we have a decent relationship. I think with all the volume, though, with Marriott and other brands, especially in Dubai, of projects in the pipeline, there's a good case to be made for an operator to be a licensed facilities management company. I think you can scale it relatively easily.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Guess on the same theme, being now we're open, we're sold out, whatever, what are some of the pitfalls, Lada, that you see?
I think there are a lot of things that can go wrong. The question is, what did we do as developer and operator to prevent them? And if we couldn't prevent them, what did we do in our buyer-facing documentation to deal with this scenario where the risk has actually materialized, right? So and that's where you have to have that foresight of all the possible scenarios that can go wrong. I'll give you, so from any operator's perspective, in order to maintain the brand standards compliance, they need to have control of operating account. They need to have control over firing and hiring of employees. They need to have control over, if possible, over an association decision-making, if that's allowed by law, right? What can we put in place? Some POAs, if possible. Are those POAs irrevocable or not? So there are so many questions that you need to ask in advance to be able to say, this is the structure that we need in order to maintain maximum control over operations, over brand standards compliance, and most importantly, enforcement of those brand standards if something goes wrong. Now, I'll give examples where things can go wrong, and you have to answer those questions before you go to market. So first, service charges. What happens if the unit owners do not pay service charges? Who's going to breach that financial gap? What happens if, another example, CapEx. What happens if they don't pay their sinking fund contributions? Or what happens if there is an emergency, a pipe, and I gave example this morning, a pipe burst in a parking lot and there is a flood. Who's going to pay? Who's going to pick up the check if there's not enough money in the bank account? Not the operator. 100% not the operator. So what do we put in place to mitigate that risk? And if we're talking about rental program, it adds the complexity altogether, because then if we have, for instance, a COVID scenario, we have a gross operating loss. Who's going to pay the working capital top up? If the unit owners are not prepared to pay, and we are in the position where we have a hole in our budget, who's going to pick up that check? So all these things, you have to ask these questions before you go to market so you can embed them in the buyer-facing documents.
Excellent. Do you see any others out there that are challenges to you from a brand perspective?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge is the relative novelty of the concept in this part of the world. We're still, even with the strong pipeline we have, our agreements are largely theoretical, right? Seeing it open, and that's when we actually learn how our agreements actually work in the real world. And getting the relative authorities, RERA, WAFI, whatever, the Egyptian authority, to be on board with a branded residential development, how that differs from an unbranded, is really important. And that's why we invest so much from the legal side in structuring the project at the onset to ensure as little hiccups as possible through, and I think the most crucial stage is the pre-opening phase in the first year. That's when you kind of see where the rubber hits the road.
Yeah, it is interesting, because what you end up having also as you lead out of these type of challenges is that the reality is there is alignment, and you need alignment, and there's a perception of a lack of alignment between the brand, the developer, investor, and the purchasers, and there truly is the need for alignment, and that is the thought process here. where do you find that the paths diverge when you're going through the negotiations to do a lack of understanding of the goals of the brand specifically, Paul, that, in setting up the structure of a new project?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. Look, I think from my perspective, our interest as the brand and the developer's interests are largely aligned, especially in a co-located where there's a vested interest for the hotel owner to ensure that the residential component maintains standards. I think where you do see some divergence in interest is with respect to the liability. We're granting a license to use our marks, and oftentimes the public perception is we're the developer. We want to make sure that it's clear in our disclosures that we're not the seller. And if things unfortunately do go wrong, the question is who's liable. And Marriott does take a fee, but it's in the grand scheme of things, it's nominal compared to the developer's proceeds. So there's always some back and forth on liability. But also, I think protecting the purchasers, their use of deposits. In this part of the world, you see a lot of off-plan sales, whereas in the States or in Western Europe, their deposits are maybe 5-10% of the purchase price, and it's never touched until handover, right? So we want to make sure that the buyer's monies are used actually for constructing the project, and that there is recourse to the extent something does go wrong. That's generally the bigger topics and negotiations.
Anything to add, or?
Yeah, I think to add from the investors, from buyers' perspective, and it echoes what you said in terms of liability and who's going to be responsible. In the end of the day, I think the golden rule of thumb for anyone who does branded residence project is disclose. Disclose to your buyers what is going to be commercial arrangement, what is going to be their limitation of rights and obligations, what's going to be their limitations on rentals, right? Is it 6 months minimum? Is it 12 months minimum? Is it through a qualified agent? Who is the qualified agent? I mean, we'll be talking a little bit about that, but you have to have that full disclosure because you'd rather disclose more than less, and then face the situation of class action or multiple claims that are depleting your resources and damaging your brand as a developer and brand of the operator, of course. In fact, the brand of the operator is at stake much more than the brand of the developer. Think about it, the failed projects, what do you see? You see XYZ branded resi failed. No one remembers the name of the developer. It's the brand that is at stake, right? So full disclosure is absolutely a must. And I would say if there's one thing you need to remember going away from the session is please remember to be honest with your buyers.
We only have a few minutes left. I think there are two topics that we were interested in digging into. One of them is around rental programs, or the other one, standalone. I can spin the wheel and let's choose one. What's the preference here?
You talk about standalone, because I believe it's the future.
Yeah, with no, there's huge growth platform. We saw that. We saw, up in the numbers. So let's dig into that. What are the opportunities and challenges?
Yeah, and I would love to hear Paul's perspective on standalone, because obviously it's you do a lot in that space. So we do work on both developers and operator side, and what we see is that until maybe 3-4 years ago, the standalone branded resi projects were really a rarity and were really tough to get off the ground for 3 main reasons. First is the higher risk of brand damage vis-a-vis the ones that had a hotel anchor attached to it. Again, because of the structuring and because of the, in most cases, developer was not staying in the middle. The second issue is because the ongoing management fees, and Rian was showing, is typically 8 to 10% of the annual OA budget. This is nothing. From an operator's perspective, this is just a drop in the ocean. This is a nominal fee, and it does not justify. So think about it, high risk of damage, very low management fees. It's really not a conducive combo to have standalone branded resis. But I think a lot of things have changed because of the fashion brands and automotive brands. And now you suddenly realize that you're actually losing a big market share by not playing in this field. And so now everyone wants to be in this field, and including F&B, Nobu was not, right? So the opportunities are endless. And I think hospitality brands started realizing that they they're losing the market share to those other non-hospitality brands, and that's why now we see a lot of standalone. And I think it is actually the future. If you do it right, if you structure it right, it's absolutely a lifestyle product that has a future in megapolises, in resorts, etc.
No, I think I agree with everything she said. I think with standalones, from a legal perspective and structuring them properly, it's really important to understand that you have no hotel support, and therefore you have a limited staff support. You have only the residential service charges to fund the cost of operating a branded project. So you want to make sure that the project is large enough to sustain these elevated service charge costs and employment as well, the labor costs. I think structuring the role of the developer throughout the term of the agreements is also a big challenge for us. We need to highlight what the role is for the developer and what we do on behalf of the developer. And the issues of liability come into play as well. But I do agree that standalones are the future. We're seeing more and more each year, and I think they're a great product.
Excellent. I know our time's run out. I really wanted to ask one minor question, because you got your golden rule, I wanted to get Paul's golden rule, and it was more so in terms of the negotiation. Where negotiations get bogged down. What is it? What becomes overtaxing in negotiations that shouldn't be a stress point that developers and the brand start to butt heads on. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, sometimes, most times, a developer thinks that the brand is there for life, right? And that's not the case. We have an agreement for a fixed term, and things could go wrong. And we want to make sure that the buyers are fully aware, and the disclosures are very clear that today, this is the brand. It may not be there tomorrow.
The same golden rule. I like that.
Yeah. And the other, I think, issue is the use of deposits, and the developers in this part of the world. Every jurisdiction regulates those use of deposits differently. In RERA, it's relatively regulated. It's getting more so in Saudi. In Egypt, not so much. And so we try to ensure that the purchasers' monies are used properly, and that they're not used for things like marketing or brokers' commissions or et cetera. So we do debate that quite a bit, but we get there. That's why we close so many deals with JD. We find a way. We find a path forward.
Well, thank you very much. We tightened up our time,
Thanks,
but we'll keep things moving because we want to move back into the other room and close out the day with one final discussion. Thank you.
Thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you.